Education is all right. I will tell you before you start. Before you educate the head, try to educate the heart.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Burn Power, coming to you on a nice day here in Tbilisi. It really hasn't been that hot a summer, which I'm grateful for, because that doesn't mean it's cold at all or windy or anything. It just means it's really pleasant, because it can get quite warm here. So what we're going to do today is kind of have, we'll call it an introductory discussion about education, or preliminary discussion. This isn't going to be any sort of hard, deep dive into the subject. How much of it could be with one video. And there are so many issues here. But what I thought I would do is reflect a bit on the state of education today, why it has become such a nightmarish world in many ways, talk a little bit about my own experiences with education, and then provide a couple of ideas from where some thoughtful people might develop some ideas from here. I don't claim to have any solution to the problem. This is something that has troubled me most of my life, for one reason or another. Ever since I basically entered school as a young child, there have been problems with education. And some of the problems I'm not going to talk about are anything related to the nuts and bolts of education, nor am I going to talk about the problem of drugs being prescribed to children for all manner of things today, nor am I going to I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the ideologies that have crept into education. But really, there's just only so much I can talk about in one video, no matter how long it is. And I can make them pretty long, can't I? We'll see how long this one goes. But before we dive in, remember, if you like this, hit like. It helps the algorithmic deities to show it to other people. Share it if you think it's a worthy discussion. You might subscribe to the channel. That's good. We just cracked 2,000 people. Who knew? And then you could always, if you really want to help support the channel, anything you give would be deeply appreciated, and it really does help me here, especially in these weird times. But if you don't have any cash to spare or whatever, that doesn't matter. Give, listen, enter in, make a few comments if you find something good to say, or questions to ask. Okay, so I got to thinking about this because a young friend of mine from Alaska got in touch with me recently, and evidently she said what I had done educationally for her when she was about 13 years old. She was part of a small group of kids that I was teaching puppetry to in Alaska, and she said that really stayed with her. And I asked her why. I got in touch with her. She sent me an email, got in touch, we talked by video chat, and she said it was that she felt that I was giving them so much knowledge. Yeah, one of my problems is I do like to talk, don't I? And it's hard to shut me up sometimes, and I'm sure you've recognized that here and there. But what I told her is I treated her not exactly like an adult. Obviously, there are subjects and such that you don't discuss with a 13-year-old. It's just, they have no reference for it. But I did treat them as if, okay, you can learn. Let's talk about the history of puppetry. Let's talk about different kinds of performance. Let's talk about the meaning of these things and these things in the virtual world. And in fact, I wrote a little puppet play for us called Faust in the 21st Century. And we performed that, and it was about Faust, who sells his soul to the devil in order to get all the knowledge and everything from the world. And in this version, Faust talks to Mephistopheles, the devil's representative, says, I want everything. I want to be connected with everything in the world. I want to know everything. And so Mephistopheles says, I will give it to you tomorrow at midnight. Come with me. And then he takes him into the 21st century and gives him a smartphone. And then Faust, at first is just amazed by everything this thing can do. Then he looks around and says, yeah, but everyone has one of these. And Mephistopheles says, you didn't think you were the only one, did you? So that's where we are, essentially. But she asked me a really tough question. Do you think I should go to school or not? Do you think I should go to college or not? She has one more year of high school in Alaska, and she was homeschooled a certain amount of the time, and then has spent the last 3 years, oh, what wonderful 3 years they have been, in public school in Alaska, which is not nearly as bad as public school in some places, but it still has many of the same problems. And I don't know if I was her and I had that choice, even if I was going to go to school. For one thing, I mean, she has some ideas of what she would like to do. But for one thing, I thought to myself, if I had this choice right now, what would I do? Well, what I would do is I would probably take a year off from school, get off the train, and really consider things. And what she wants to do, and the other reason she got in touch with me, is come visit Europe in a year or so. And I said, fine, come here. And I explained it's cheap, it's great, you need to come here. But she also has relatives in other countries in Europe. So she could have a great 9 months to a year traveling. So, but she has gifts in various, she liked to work with ceramics. She was very good with the puppetry. She's also likes to sing, but she's also interested in what we'll call the environmental sciences, more hands-on field work kind of stuff, related to the ecology and such like that. And of course, as soon as you say that, it's like there's a slippery slope here, and it's the slope of ideology. I didn't know what to say to her. She's not a Christian like me, so I didn't feel like giving her too much of a slant in that direction. But basically, it seemed like, the question is, do you need a degree today? What is going on? And the truth is, we don't really know. What is the state of education in the Western world today? And I do say specifically the Western world, with emphasis on the Anglosphere, Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, England, of course, the UK, Ireland, South Africa, because they are getting one set of ideas during this time. Whereas then you go to Western Europe, and it's a very different set of ideas, similar, because obviously they're right near each other, but also very different. And I find going to France, the educational quality is better. And that is, in some ways, maybe it's worse, but in other ways, I think the students in France learn to question things and learn to read and learn to discuss things like history and philosophy, much more so than the average American student does. Granted, there are some very interesting places in America where one can learn, and I'm going to talk about those when I talk about my own story with education. But I want to give you an idea from a really outside perspective of what American education looks like right now. Another place where education is extremely well respected is in the east of Asia, Eastern Asia, China, Japan, Korea, and you could go on. And in North Korea, however, education is not at all respected because they don't want anyone learning anything critical. And in fact, the country is in dire poverty. They have been in starvation and famine. They have been in complete authoritarian, dictatorial lockdown. People are thrown in prison for the smallest infractions. And one of the people who has escaped North Korea and lived to talk about it is a young woman named Yeonmi Park. I highly recommend the book she wrote, and she has her own YouTube channel, but more importantly, she's done a couple of really interesting videos, particularly the one I'm going to show you a little piece of with Jordan Peterson, the famous psychologist. I always get psychology and psychiatry mixed up. But the point is this. I want you to listen to what she is saying. She came from the worst kind of communist dictatorship on earth that's ever existed. She comes into South Korea. When she's in her teens, she learns to read and to be a good student in university there, although she does say there are problems with their universities. And then she comes to America, where she does well enough to go to Columbia University in New York, which was one of the great institutions for learning in America. And so she talks with Jordan Peterson about that. Let's play this clip. An outsider's view of American education, the best American education.
Okay, and so you'd gone to university and came out of North Korea. Then you went to university in South Korea. So you got to see that culture as an outsider. Mm-hmm. And then you came to the United States and you got to see Columbia University. So what did you conclude about your time in Columbia University? What were your impressions? What do you have to say to people about what you saw?
I know you. Oh my gosh! So that 4 years from 2016 to 2020, it was a complete madness. I became very pessimistic about the Western world after university because, literally in these humanity classes, even the economics. I was studying economics for 2 years and later human rights. The professor would send me the emails. Oh, this class we're gonna cover this. If it triggers you, you don't have to come to the class or don't even do the reading. I'm a rape survivor. I'm a slave. I gone through so many things, and they say, oh, this can trigger the rape. This can trigger this, and then before the class they say, let's go through what do you want to be called, your pronouns. And my English is not that good. I sometimes mistakenly call him or she, and then they start asking me to say they, and then I don't know how to incorporate in my English that pronoun properly. And it made me so nervous to talk in the classroom. And one day I got into a fight with my professor. She was saying, the fact that you're letting men holding door for you is you are giving in to their overpowering you. And I was like, no, isn't it kindness? Is it decency? I hold the door for people too. It's not like I'm trying to signal that I'm powerful than you. And she was like, you're so brainwashed from North Korea. And I was a scenario, of course, my GPA is going to be affected. And it's like, okay, I got to really shut up. I got to try to do my best to get a good GPA. So that 4 years, I learned to censor myself all over again. And it became ridiculous.
That's terrible.
Exactly. I literally risked my life to say what I think is right. And now I'm contribute 4 years of time, try how to create a safe space and be sensitive enough. So, and where am I? And it gave me a lot of chaos. Did I become free? Where am I? Is there any truly free place in this world right now?
So why did you stay at Columbia?
It was my father's dream for me to be college educated. I found it was not worth it. It was so certificate degree that
it was so
was a waste of time, energy, and money.
Really?
Obviously.
That's a terrible thing. That's terrible.
It was. Honestly, I tell like my son that if you want to study humanity in one of these universities, I'm never gonna pay for it. Like I'm so clear on that to my son. But
I'm so embarrassed about that. I'm so embarrassed about that. It's so awful to hear that. Those universities, they were great, you know. They were great.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And it's not that long ago that they were great, that they did what they said they were going to do. And if you went and got a humanities education, you got educated. You learned to write. You learned to think. You learned history. You learned to be cultured. That happened. It wasn't that long ago. It was when I went to university, it was still like that. When I taught at Harvard, it was still like that. There were politically correct murmurings and rumblings, but by and large, the university was still uncorrupted. And the humanities are at the core of the university. If they're corrupted, if they've gone in the way that you're already describing, there's no way the universities can survive. They're not technical schools. The core of the university was the humanities. I mean, look at what Animal Farm did for you. That's what reading great books does for people. You know, it illuminates their soul. It's not optional. And I'm so appalled that that was your experience at Columbia. It's so awful that you went through all that and managed to get to this great university, and you know, and that you had to shut yourself down, and that your basic conclusion was that it was a waste of time. Now, did you have courses where that wasn't the case? Did you have courses that were worth it?
I mean, so one class I remember in my senior year, it was called the Western Civilization, the music art. One of the core that Columbia had is the Western art and the music.
Has still,
right.
Not for long.
But then I was excited to learn about, but I thought at the end of the day, this is still the West. America is in the West, right? It would be funny if you want to study Eastern music at the end of in the core. And the professors like, who has a problem with calling the Western civilization like art? And then every single one of them all lifting their hands because they were saying there are so many artists who were greater than Beethoven and Mozart. We silenced them, erased them all. And that's why we have to now end up studying these like bigots, you know, who are racist. And I'm like, and then they were like looking at me, why are you not putting your hands up? Somebody who doesn't have the problem with talking about Western civilization. So that's like, I was like, do I even have to do this to graduate? And that was, of course, necessary to do that course to graduate. So every class had an element of being a politically correct and shaping you how you think. And I learned how to censor myself so well after Columbia. And then I was freaked out one day. It's like, what am I doing? This is not what I escaped, you know? It just... And
I'm so ashamed of that. That's so awful. I can't believe it. You know, it's no picnic to watch these great institutions hang themselves.
Yeah. I literally felt like it's a suicide of civilization. Like,
what is striking to me about this clip is how Jordan Peterson is in tears over the shape of American education. Jordan Peterson taught in Harvard not that many years ago. He is talking about, this is the best we can do. This is all we have for you. Was a new regime of censorship, a new regime of authoritarian policing in schools, that everything now comes down to these social justice categories, that there's no more knowledge that isn't approved knowledge. We've flipped the 1950s completely over. So the 1950s was, there was only approved knowledge, but it was right-wing patriotic. Now what we've said is there's only approved knowledge, and it's left-wing, woke, social justice, whatever. And in fact, at the end of the conversation, and it's well over an hour long, but I highly recommend listening to it. Her story would make anything in Charles Dickens look tame. I mean, it's just such a nightmare of events and such. And she doesn't even include her Columbia experience in there because, by contrast, it's nothing. But in at the end of it, the thing that really strikes Jordan Peterson is that he says, I wish you had better professors. Let's play the last final clip from the very end of that video and just watch his expression.
And I don't know, like I can never be that person recklessly say we're gonna win in this battle. And to me, this is a very dangerous state we are all in collectively, everywhere in this world, that we are not safe from this devil, communism.
That's a good place to stop.
Yes. Sorry, that was very intense interview. It's been.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for.
You're quite the creature. I really wish you would have had better professors. You deserve them.
No, thank you for everything you do. Seriously, doctor. It's been, you have no idea how it touches so many, us and me especially, and reminding me of like how good still humans are, and really helping me not to lose my hope. So thank you for everything you do.
Yeah, you too, kiddo. Your book's deadly, and so are you. Keep it up. Keep it up.
And all I can say is the same thing. Because education has been weird in America for quite a while. It was weird when I was young, and that's one of the reasons I've thought about education for a long time. What's happened is education has essentially become indoctrination. It has become propagandistic. We haven't, weirdly, in some sort of ersatz world, become what we were fighting in the communist world. And, of course, in the old ex-communist world, Putin has traded place with a former dictator in Europe, in Germany. And so how do these things happen? Well, easily, when you lose track of what the point of education is. C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man says this. He's contrasting the old style of education. And remember, this is 1942, 43. He gave this as a lecture, and then eventually it was a book. So he's not talking about the 1960s or the 1990s or the aughts, obviously. He's talking about education then, how it was already past a demarcation point. And this isn't to say, well, education is always flawed. Well, yeah, education is always flawed. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the old style of education versus the new. He says the difference between the old and the new education will be an important one. Where the old initiated, the new merely conditions. Let me read that again. Where the old education initiated someone into being a human, being a man, being a woman. The new merely conditions. The old dealt with its pupils as grown birds deal with young birds when they teach them to fly. The new deals with them more as the poultry keeper deals with young birds, making them thus or thus for purposes for which the birds know nothing. In a word, the old was a kind of propagation, a continuance of the species. Men transmitting manhood to men, which already it's like I can hear someone reading this and going like, he's saying men. And that's part of the problem. We can no longer translate the past into the present because we have become so conditioned by our propaganda. So if you don't hear men as all human beings here, if you have to translate it into your head and get angry, you are one of the people conditioned. If you can't translate that into humanity teaching humanity, which sounds much weaker than men transmitting manhood to men. He says, but the new is merely propaganda. And this is just an amazing passage. The Abolition of Man is a short book. If you want to understand today, read that book. It's like 90 pages long. It's one of C.S. Lewis's best. In an essay he wrote called Lilies That Fester, and this is from the collection called The World's Last Night, he goes on to talk about what the new education will do for people. And he hit this so spot on. Listen to this. Every boy or girl who is born is presented with the choice. And he's talking about a thing called, it looks like chariontocracy, but it's really gerontocracy, because he's using a Greek word, and that's how that would have been pronounced. So gerontocracy. He's talking about the rule of the cultured. And by cultured, he doesn't mean the people who just know about art and literature and philosophy and things like that. He means the people who have a very approved version of what culture is. This is what they want you to read. Certainly no longer Christian things. Certainly no longer all the dead white males. Certainly, Jane Austen is now considered racist. Why? Because she was white. You get these really weird things. Everyone in the past who didn't approve of trans, and did anyone in the past approve of trans? Probably not. But they're all out the door, you see, once you cross that. So he says this, and you can translate this, and that's a very important thing to do when you're reading the past, into the present. He goes, every boy and girl who is born is presented with the choice. Read the poets whom we, the cultured, approve, and say the sorts of things we say about them, or be a prole. Let me translate that for you. Read, watch the YouTube sites, spend time with the news channels, YouTube channels, whom we, the culture, approve. Be woke. And say the sorts of things we say about them. Now, this can work either way. It's not just the woke. It can be the alt-right. It can be the people who are just, lost in their conspiracies and stuff. But they don't tend to have the levers of power. Or be a prole, be a worker, get kicked out off the ladder down into the lower classes. And he says, and this shows how gerontocracy can deal with the minority of pupils who have tastes of their own and are not pure plasticine. This is what happens when people have their own sense of learning. They're learning to think for themselves. They're not pure plasticine, clay. You just can't mold them, he says. They get low marks because they don't answer the questions right, and then you kick them off the educational ladder at a low rung, and they disappear into the proletariat, into the lower classes. At this point, the proletariat would have been the working classes, but today it's the couch potato classes. Today it's the gaming classes. Today it's the Twitter classes. It is the people obsessed with, you get a phone, good luck. I hope you're enjoying yourself. But that is what he's saying. That is authoritarian education. And that is precisely what has developed. There is an official, like I say, it really has taken hold in the Anglosphere, more also in Western Europe, Scandinavia, Germany. And the further you get towards Eastern Europe, the more these things start to get questioned, particularly in places like Poland. And Georgia is not particularly online with a lot of this stuff. So you have to follow the line, and the line is only that the individual is sacred. They can choose whatever they want. There's nothing we have to do for everyone except, in some abstract way, save the planet by liberating everyone who doesn't agree with the message, the woke agenda, whatever you want to call it, the Hydra. Now, let's look at some other videos from people who have some intelligence, or maybe don't, but are presenting the idea that essentially what's happened is our education has become an authoritarian joke. So we're going to start with Roger Scruton, before his death, was actually quite in demand as a speaker because he'd been seeing certain things coming for a while. And this is him talking about what has happened to education and essentially how this new ideology has undercut the meaning of learning. Learning used to be, and C.S. Lewis has a great essay about this. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. It may have been Lily Setfester, but there were some other good ones, where he talks about what used to matter, the way they used to test people is they gave you a book, And then they gave you not a multiple choice test, certainly not an essay, but they gave you a book report, essentially, and they told you, they wanted to know what happened in the book. What was this book about? Who are the characters and such? That's all. And if you got that, you got the grade. And he said the point of that was not to test you. The test wasn't supposed to do you good. It was the book that was supposed to do you good. The older education, which he is referring to, let you read the book for yourself without interpreting it. I remember I spent a short period in junior college in California, and one teacher said, we're going to read Moby Dick, and here's what you're going to see in it. You see? And I didn't read it then. As soon as I stopped going to that school, I read it for myself, because I didn't want to know that the white whale symbolized X, God, Puritanism, whatever. I didn't want to know that. I wanted to know what I thought of the book. And that's how I have learned ever since. But Roger Scruton, shall you give us your words?
The academy has been invaded by a new form of study. It used to be the case that at universities you were teaching a recognized subject with a recognized curriculum, and you were carrying out research or scholarship in the humanities, which was open-minded, guided by the pursuit of truth, and not dismayed, particularly if it came to surprising or unorthodox conclusions. Now, one of the first things that happens when a totalitarian government takes over is that the universities are cleaned up. As I say, people who are doing that kind of thing get thrown out. This is what happened when the Nazis took over the German universities, and when the Soviets took over, the communists took over the Russian universities. And it was the case in Eastern Europe in my day, with the sole exception of Poland, which had universities which were the only universities where every professor was on the right. That was because the communists were everywhere. But on the whole, this is the first move that the totalitarian mentality makes, to stop that kind of free-minded, open scholarship in pursuit of truth. But so we have been lucky in inheriting universities of that kind. But is it the case that we still have them? We have seen the growth of an extraordinary number of new subjects in the university, in which the pursuit of truth seems to be secondary to something else, the other thing being the pursuit of some kind of political conformity. If you take a subject like women's studies, now I know this is a controversial issue, but perhaps it can be talked about freely in this room. You can't talk about it freely in America, on the whole. Anyway, there is a subject. It's very difficult to imagine that you would succeed in that subject if you didn't have, either at the outset or certainly in the conclusion, feminist opinions. And it's a subject constructed around an ideology. It might be that this ideology is grounded in truth, who knows? But to question it is something which is essentially made impossible both by the curriculum and by the way of teaching it. And I think you'll find that there are quite a lot of subjects like that growing in our universities, in which conformity to an orthodoxy takes precedence over intellectual method. And it may be that there has to be something like that. As maybe after all, in the Middle Ages, maybe theology was like that. But the interesting thing about medieval theology is that it encouraged the intellectual method, despite its requirement of orthodoxy.
The next little clip is from Jordan Peterson talking with Camille Paglia. And Camille Paglia, she's just like a tornado when she talks. She's always, I sometimes think I say a lot of ums and repeated little phrases and placeholders, but she makes me seem British by comparison, because the British always seem to know how to talk. I mean, you listen to someone like Tom Holland or Douglas Murray or C.S. Lewis or, well, obviously Winston Churchill, but these people seem to know how to construct sentences in ways that Americans tend to not know. And the reason we don't know, of course, has to do with our education. But here they're talking about men and women being educated and the underlying assumptions of the new education. And this was done about 3-4 years ago. Give this a listen.
So now a couple of things. So the universities, I mean, I've proposed, although it's something that's probably beyond my power, that what should happen is that the universities, the real content of the universities should be stolen back from the universities because they're not making use of their intellectual property, and that something should be started online that would constitute a genuine university. The problem is the accreditation issue, but I don't think that's an unsolvable problem. But do you see, like, all these people who have these postmodern neo-Marxist agendas are completely embedded inside the universities,
right? Absolutely.
Right?
And the point is, over the last 25 years, I have received constant mail from people dropping out of the graduate schools, right, or giving up altogether on any idea of being a college professor. Okay, so what's happened is that the most talented and independent thinking people, okay, have avoided the school. So we're now, who we have are the compliant, the servile, okay, the people who are currently in the university and hiring their successors, yes. Okay, are mal-educated themselves, okay? I mean, one of the first letters I received in the early 90s, I'll never forget it, was from a woman who was now painting houses in Missouri and said she had been part of the comparative literature graduate program at Berkeley, and that she finally had to drop out because she said every time she would express enthusiasm for what they were reading, the people looked at her as if she had somehow created an offense. In other words, enthusiasm for art, the very things you need as a teacher in the classroom, okay, were being trained out. Okay,
yeah, well, the thing is,
of the grad students.
If you respect art and literature, that means that you implicitly accept a hierarchy of quality, right?
Yes.
And that, of course, contradicts the fundamental tenets of the postmodern doctrine, which is that there are no hierarchies of quality. And, you talked a little bit earlier about the idea that, you referred again to the idea that everything is associated with power, and that's the thing that I can't help but associate with a kind of personality pathology. Like, from a psychometric perspective, the best predictors of long-term success in our society are intelligence, IQ, which you can measure very accurately, and trait conscientiousness, which actually is a real testament to the culture, right? Because what you'd hope is that the smart people who work hard are the people who advance. It isn't like they deserve it exactly. That isn't what I mean. It's that if the culture is harnessing the productive power of individuals properly, then it should differentially reward people who are smart and conscientious because they're going to do a bunch of really interesting work for the rest of us. And that's very well established finding. It's as good as any finding in the social sciences. But despite that, and despite the fact that everything works, which is a goddamn miracle of sorts, there is this consistent story that we live in a patriarchy, that it's only oppressive, that it's done nothing but oppress women since the beginning of time, which is also something that just boggles my mind, Like, I know that
men have sacrificed for women and children, including their lives, okay, for thousands of years. Yes, there's been brutality, but the brutality is in the minority, okay? Yes, this sick portrayal of human history is nothing but male oppression and female victimage, okay? This is a way to permanently ensure the infantilization of women.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, well,
And of course, Camille Paglia is absolutely livid over the changes. What's interesting is we are dealing with people already here. Scruton Peterson and Camille Paglia are three philosophically very different people. Scruton is a traditional conservative in the English mode. Peterson is this guy influenced by Jung. He's got all this stuff. I mean, he's even, sometimes takes psychedelics seriously, blah, blah, blah. And then Camille Paglia is like Lou Reed. She's like punk rock. She is this crazy lesbian, she talks very bluntly and directly, and yet they all agree that something has happened to education and that it will be dying. This is a woman named Kemi Badenoch, And she is a member of parliament in the UK, and this is her talking about essentially Britain wanting to adopt the Black Lives Matter, or rather the critical race theory ideas, into British education. And this is her, she's African, talking about how this is absurd. Listen to her talking.
Many members have said they want more Black history taught, but they don't seem to be aware of what is actually on the curriculum. Our curriculum is not the curriculum of 50, 40, or even 20 years ago. Children today are able to learn about the British Empire and colonialism, about the transatlantic slave trade and its abolition, and of how our history has been shaped by people of all ethnicities, as well as having the opportunity to study non-European cultures such as Mughal India or the Benin Empire, which is where my ancestors decided to have their own opportunity to take over the world in their own way. Pupils can currently study migration empires and the people in the AQA History GCSE, for example. The member for Ilford North is quite wrong to say that that's the only place that it can be learned. There are many other exam bodies that do offer this. But our curriculum does not need decolonizing for the simple reason that it is not colonized. We should not apologize for the fact that British children primarily study the history of these islands. And it goes without saying that the recent fad to decolonize maths, decolonize engineering, decolonize the sciences that we have seen across our universities to make race the defining principle of what is studied is not just misguided, but actively opposed to the fundamental purpose of education.
And then I'm not even going to comment on this next short clip, except to say this was found on TikTok. This is a woman who is so happy that she was communicating about gender and all the things that kids need to know in her preschool. She's not the only one, believe me.
This has been my first year in preschool with a class of my own. We've been talking about gender and skin color and consent. It's been fabulous.
And finally, Tim Poole is talking with another woman. I didn't get her name, but the subject is important. It's about how furries should be protected in school. You see what's happened is we've gone from the rejection of the older style of education to further and further levels of insanity and inclusion. Inclusion becomes this like deity that all people have to be included, except of course the people who disagree with
More
us.
specifically, correct if I'm wrong, but you were mentioning something about
furries and
schools
things
protecting furries.
Yes,
is this true?
Schools protecting furries.
But this
was happened. Yeah, I won't name the school, but this actually happened, and it's very similar to kind of the gender things as well. If you're a teacher and you don't refer to somebody as their correct pronoun, or now a furry, for example, you could be fired, or you can be in trouble, suspended, whatever it might be.
For those that aren't familiar with you guys all know what furries are, right?
Yeah, but enlighten me.
Unfortunately.
So they're basically people who have some kind of, that identify with anthropomorphic cartoon animals. So they have what's called a fursona, and we got booted off the internet, but we'll just keep going. They have what's called a fursona, where they have a suit that they wear that is a cartoon animal. Mm-hmm. And some people refer to them as like fetishists. Others say it's just more of an identity thing.
And as he says, furries are these creatures, people who run around wearing cartoon animal suits. And there's a lot of other weirdness connected to it. I did a lot more on the subject in my 21st Century Cargo Cults video, which I would recommend. But the point is this. At a certain point, the educational system has just run off the rails. And I'm not just making those up as like two weird examples of things getting stranger. You could just spend nothing but looking at the progress of education now. And don't go into the past, just start looking at it now. Look at the issues that are coming up. And what you'll notice is people don't even seem to notice when things have changed. Is there anybody 10 years ago connected with education who would have said, we don't have a definition of what a woman is? Because that's where they are now. But is there anyone who saw that coming? When the trans bathroom issue became something. See, I heard immediately, oh, wait, Barack, these are not your old school transsexuals they're talking about. These are people who simply are defining themselves in different ways. But is there anyone prior to that moment who said, oh, we can't know what a woman is because gender and sex and blah, 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 blah? No. Nobody, even 10 years ago, could have understand that, except for people on the fringes of the argument who are probably now very happy to have infiltrated the entire public school system with this sort of thing. And there are books for children. I have one that I have here that it's just all about going home and talking to your parents about race. But it's like for 6-year-olds. It's just like, no, they need to learn the English language first. Don't just show them pictures in a book and say, Mommy, why are we so privileged? What is wrong with this picture? It's completely inverted. There's nothing to do with education there. Education is both a very individual thing and also a collective thing. And we've broken this line down so that now there have been people who've wanted to take their kids out of the educational system. Now, I don't know how this works in Europe or Asia or other countries. I don't even know how it works here in Georgia. But in America, you can take your kids out of public education and homeschool them, which actually these days seems like the better option, because the nutbag insanity they're getting in, literally sometimes, getting in public school education, the unchecked curricula developments, even in the last 5 years, more and more keeps changing. And it's coming from the top down. But so this is a choice, this individual or collective thing. Now, one of the problems that homeschoolers often have is social adjustment, to which my thought is that is a problem, but the problem is, do you really want to be adjusted to the new ideas? No, wait. The new ideas. No, the newer ideas. No, wait, they changed again. You see, that's what's happening. The ideas are changing quicker than anybody can keep up with them. The problem with homeschool, though, is, there are curricula you can follow according to your own beliefs as a Christian. But I know my friend who called me up, who got in touch with me, who isn't a Christian, who was young and homeschooled at the time I taught her about puppetry. Her parents aren't Christians. They're more sensitive, humanist kind of, millennials. And they're living in Alaska. They get points for that, of course. But, it's not just the Christians. It's not just people trying to get away from the public school education. It's also people who recognize, there are a lot of other problems in the public school education. And there are issues of safety. Now, those have gone blown out of proportion, but nevertheless. So homeschooling is a kind of an answer. The problem again is, I think you need to be connected with more than, you can't just have one homeschool. You need to be connected with others, I think. And I'm not saying that I have an answer to this question. I'm just saying that these are problems. There's also what's called classical Christian education, which is an interesting concept. And there are high schools and I can think of a couple of colleges or universities that are kind of built on this lines. And what they do is they teach people the classics, as in even ancient Greek, Roman things. They teach them classic literature, Shakespeare, all of this, plus an approach to the Bible that's pretty solid. The problem is these people also tend to be they're a bit fringy, which doesn't bother me, but they're also a bit insulated, because here's the problem: nobody else is doing that anymore. Unfortunately, those classics, what used to be a part of a basic education, are no longer an education. And we'll get to why in a moment here. But the other problem is these people are often the people trying to create things to bridge between the Christian world and the non-Christian world. And the problem is they only get the gloss of the non-Christian world. They don't understand the depth of the darkness that they're not understanding. It's not critical enough. And I have a friend who I know very well who doesn't live very far from me here. And he was involved with a college that in America that was exactly one of these schools. And he tried his best to give them critical education and to kind of shock them sometimes to learn. But the problem is that all students are, I hate to use the word retarded, delayed. That's all the word retarded means. You see it in France all the time. You know, le train est retardé. You know, the train's delayed. But that's the thing. Everyone is in this neotenous zone. They're like pollywogs that still have their tail. They're like frogs that still have their pollywog tail. So it's, and kids today, you know, just simply aren't aging. What it is that they are, part of it has to do with what they consume as culture and media. Also the fact that they're not given the encouragement to, as Jordan Peterson might say, grow the hell up. They're encouraged to sit in their rooms, play games, watch videos, you know, Netflix and chill. No babies, please. You know, that's the world of today. And that's what this classical Christian world isn't connected to. But the larger universities certainly are. And, you know, in America, there are universities that have a, what can we say, a distinctive, well, they're listed as party schools. So you can go to a school that has great parties. What in the hell is that about? And, you know, is that still happening? I believe so, certainly. But private schools are an option too. And of course, there's Catholic school education. And that's got its pros and cons. But public school, it seems to me, is just completely damaged. And I have a good friend who works in public school in Alaska. And he says he's sending his kids to public school. And I salute him. He's a Christian, but how much crap do they have to swallow? And how much conditioning, as C.S. Lewis mentions, will they have to get? More than I think they would like. And I don't know the answer. Education in other countries is different. And if you have some thoughts about education and you're from the UK or Germany or France or Spain or Georgia or, you know, Ukraine or wherever, write your comment there. Or if you're from, you know, Japan or South Korea or something, write your comment there about how you feel what your education is like. I'd really be interested. So what we have is essentially a failure of education in the 21st century, specifically in the Anglosphere, but it goes on from there. There's repercussions. Like I say, it's like something, there's a bomb that went off, and it's slowly making its way around the world, along with our media, which is really central to this. So one of the big problems here is the problem of audio-visual learning. And Jacques Ellul, in his book, The Humiliation of the Word, which I highly, highly recommend. If you've got a brain and can read a book that really deals both with kind of sociological issues and spiritual issues, this book puts them both together. In a sense, this is, I would say, the culmination of his work, because he has one line of writing on technology, propaganda, politics, and then another line of writing that, as a Christian, about different subjects ranging from faith and love to, meaning. And they run on separate tracks, but in this book, the tracks finally run together. And the point is this, related to audiovisual learning, is that when you have audiovisual learning, you have visual learning. The word suffers at the hands of visuals. This is why music changed so much when the video became the main means of people consuming it. This is why you can watch Jordan Peterson talking, or you can listen to something, but listening is a very different activity from watching. And watching tends to give you an immediate impression, but listening enters your mind, which is why I enjoy listening to Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook talking about history, because then it just goes straight into my mind. And because as soon as you put images to it, for instance, let's say they were talking about Cleopatra, as they did recently, and now I'm watching images from movies or documentaries or whatever on Cleopatra, that's going to totally change. And in fact, most documentaries will only emphasize the visual things. And if they can't find a visual for it, they'll say a few things and then they'll go on. And you don't, because they'll skip the things that we don't have good visual documentation for. This happens all the time. The next problem is, okay, so we're bombarding the students with audiovisual learning. And yet at the same time, they have no media literacy. Now, we do pay some lip service in America to teaching English, or what passes for English, lol, OMG, the state of English. But we do not have, in general, a necessity for courses on media literacy, which means I would say it starts with different optical tools, moves to movies, goes into television, ends with computers and video games. Because without that literacy, see, people think because they see a thing, they understand a thing. And they don't understand the effect of these things upon you. For instance, they don't understand, most people have no understanding of the effect of editing. Now, I have some understanding of the effect of editing because I work with editing. But more importantly, it's because I can tell as soon as I'm watching a film when the visuals are saying one thing and the audio is saying something else. I can also tell when there is a break in the clip and they've left something out of there that maybe I needed to hear. And this is particularly true in when looking at news stories these days. When I say, they just did something. Or when I see them using the same clips over and over because they haven't got any new ones. This happens with the Ukraine war. I think that the sound bite, which is essentially a visual kind of thing, even though it's sound, has essentially ruined us. Now, the good news is that Jordan Peterson started doing 2.5-hour lectures and has millions of people watching them. That's really good news. But the truth is, most people, no matter how many movies they watch, really don't understand not only how what they're watching affects them, but how they can be manipulated by the image. Now, we know that more in language, but we don't know that in visuals, and visuals is where we're living. So that's really important. Another aspect of the failure of education is we have the problem in schools, as I just mentioned, of audiovisual learning. So from films to television, visual aids, computers, the more students are given a diet of visual stimulation, the less they are able to work with abstract ideas like truth, or morals, or meaning. These things are not to be found in any direct way through visual communication. They have to be learned through hearing. So we have the same problem in museums. There's a wonderful old museum here, which unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately, they are remodeling right now. But I went into it before they remodeled it. It's been here since I think the 1860s, and it's a museum of silk. And it's old school museum. I hope they keep a lot of the old, I was told they're going to keep a lot of the old shelves and such, because there are these old wooden glass cases. It was a very dark room. I loved it because I saw this is how they used to present things. And they would show you, for instance, here are the leaves of the mulberry plant that the silkworms eat. Here are the cocoons of the silkworms. Here are the silkworms themselves. Here's the silk. here are the textures and fabrics made 100 years ago. Here, in other words, I just like, that's an education. I'm learning about silk and silk weaving. And there wasn't a lot written or visual, like, big boards with pictures and stuff on. It was mostly just the stuff. Oh, I love that. But the new stuff, like for instance, if you go to Budapest, Hungary, Budapest, and you go to the Terror House, I think it's Terror House, museum there, and it's in the old, I think, the Hungarian equivalent of the KGB. It's the spy house and people were actually tortured in the basement and stuff. Well, there's a lot of good information on there. People like Rick Steves have done videos in Hungary saying like, this is a great museum, you really should go there. And my feeling is like, way too many bells and whistles. There's a similar museum in Prague, way too many bells and whistles, way too many graphic displays. And this happens in art museums where you walk up and you have a little explanation on the side, and it's written what the painting is, who wrote it, and what date it was done. And you walk up and you see a person spend 10, 30 seconds looking at a painting, then read the little description, and then walk away. That's looking for people today. That's scanning. And that's what all those big graphic boards do. We scan, we see a big picture, this is a photograph blown up, this is this image, and it's not learning. And museums are supposed to be places for learning. And I even saw this at Auschwitz, and Auschwitz actually made me sad because there were moments there that really touched me, and then there were moments there that I just said, like, why is all this extra stuff here to, audio-visual treatment? Why do they do that? So my feeling is that, we have the same problem in churches. So you go into a church, there's screens for the points for the sermon or the class. There are, and also to read, because people can no longer read in books. They have to read off screens. And someone did that so they aren't singing down here, so they put the screen up there. But now they're just looking at the screen. And I know one pastor who put images of running water behind the lyrics of the song. I'm just going you're turning it into audio-visual entertainment. And it's not. It's something more interior. It has to do with more sound in the word. And also adult Sunday school classes in churches. Many of them now use documentaries that are in chapters, and they sit and watch them. My church in Alaska had me kind of go through the How Should We Then Live series with an adult class, which was fine. Obviously, I don't mind watching documentaries. I got lots of them. But the problem is, I'd much rather see someone take the time to learn. Later they asked me to do something on church history. That was great, because I just did my studies. And, I knew a certain amount, I added more. And, there was no big audio-visual treat. It was, learn this. You need to hear the stories. And the story takes place in audio. It's an oral thing. And then children are given weird little programs with all the cute things, and it's just, one of the problems is that all of this visual education does not prepare a person for the difficult things of life. There's nothing of truth that comes through the visual part. It's just there because our attention span has been so reduced that we can't do anything without having visual aids. And I would say you really need to learn to listen. One way to listen is also to be doing something rather than watching something. So I recently built the shelves you see behind me. It took me hours and hours and hours of staining, and I had the wood cut for me, but staining and then putting varnish on it, and but I got the entire of Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian listened to while I was doing that. And that was a great way because it keeps your mind working. I'm not using that part of my mind while I'm doing this. But it doesn't give you images you don't really need. This is the problem with seeing the movie before reading the book sometimes. I mean, there are books that don't matter. I mean, go ahead and watch The Godfather. The book isn't that great. But, do read Lord of the Rings before it is, interpreted, misinterpreted for you. And then there are other subjects in education, and this would take me off a long way, but I'm just going to mention it. One of them is, it's been standard practice for a while in America to throw the boys and girls in together, particularly the teenage boys and girls. And the problem with that is, young boys in particular end up thinking they're the cock of the walk. They think they're somebody. They get cocky, and so they say, I want this girl, I want that girl. And the point in the older way of doing things, those young teenage boys who really don't know anything and are only acting like they know need to be around the older men who are working to be put in their place, because school itself has been very feminized these days. And so the girls are doing well because they're getting the kind of education that works for them. But the boys need some guy to essentially say, stop, you don't know what you're doing. You're lazy. You think you're just full of yourself. And a woman can't say that to a guy in the same way that a guy can hear it from another man, particularly if he respects the man. Which then leads to other questions about what in the world is going on with sex and gender in schools. I'm not going to go there, but I'm saying this is a whole other area in which really it's a failure of education. Then, and then, in American education, what is the deal with allowing students to have any kind of phone that they can text on in the middle of class? I don't understand that at all, even for university students. I just don't understand that. You should not be distracted, and those things are pure distraction. And they're not taking you away to good things. They're taking you away to, I'll see you later at 6 o'clock. Oh my God, did that really happen? Kind of stuff. So, finally, modern education is completely undermined by its visual qualities, by its ideological qualities, the notion of any sense of legitimate authority. That older folks might know something younger folks don't. Older folks in the Anglosphere are more and more just kind of like, let's get you off the stage, boomer. It's like that they, we don't want to hear from you. We just want to scroll. We just want to scan. We just want to spend time doing what we do. We don't need any education, whereas in fact, they need all the education in the world. So let me talk about my own experiences with education for a little bit here. Let's just say this. I was a very lackluster student. Now, there were issues related to growing up, having 3 fathers. You could translate into boyfriends in today's world. Before I was 7, my biological father divorced my mother, then she married another guy, he was immature, she divorced him, married another guy, he was an alcoholic. So by the time we moved from Hawaii to California when I was 7, one of the things that would happen was I would get dragged into school. They didn't have the kinds of categorizations we have today. Today it's like, ADD, ADHD, we've got some Ritalin for him. He's going to need this. Nor did they have, I was having problems. I would just sit and draw circles. Ooh, autism. All these alarm bells go off for people. To which me looking back then, I want to go like, could it be the fact that his mother is currently married to an alcoholic, trying to escape him by moving to a new place, and he keeps following her because she keeps inviting him back? Could that be a factor here? Oh my goodness, are we going back to Freud? Are there really psychological effects? No, it's mental illness. Everything's a mental illness. It's like this little thing that's wrong, and we have a whole bunch of people who have the same condition. And I'm not saying there isn't ADHD, and I'm not saying that there isn't autism, but I'm saying the diagnosis for these things is way off the charts. Next, by not being labeled, I consider that one of the best things that ever happened to me. Because I find when people go through life saying, I'm ADHD, or I'm, borderline autistic, or whatever, by having those kinds of diagnoses, you start to say, this is my identity, where I never was allowed to say that. So I'm fine. Yeah, I could be a better student today. I could get much more done. But I don't look at that as being any sort of mental issue. I look at that as being primarily like, I never really learned how to buckle down. And yet, I do get something done, evidently, and we'll discuss that. But I did have a lot of interests. I was interested in monster movies, which ended up being very important. I did a little bit of drawing. I was interested, and then around the age of 11 or 12, I became really interested in music, which I still am. And so I started just researching it. I would hear something about a lot of this rock music comes from the blues. I go like, blues, huh? What are the blues? And I would go and I'd find a record that had all these different blues musicians like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and Little Walter and such. And I would take it home and I would go like, wow, this is amazing. But I would take my cues from people. I would go into record stores when I was 13 years old and talk to people a little bit. And there was one record store, it was called Record King. I think the last name of the people who ran it was King, and they lived in San Rafael, California. And I would go into this store, and they adopted me. They met my mother once and said, he is just like the best person. She was like, really? Because, of course, mothers tend to see all your faults as well as all your good qualities. But I was so good at blowing everything off. I was really always told, oh, he has such potential. But I think the highlight of my education when I was in we called it junior high, now they call it middle school. But the highlight of that was that they passed out the math books. I was put into the dumbbell math books, and the only other people who were there were essentially criminals and people who had maybe they had ADHD, I don't know. But they were all, really, and what they did is they handed me the second copy of the teacher's manual that had all the answers. And the students there saw me getting so many questions right, and the teacher said, you are improving so much. And the kids, these criminals, they were really like the criminals. They'd say yeah, he's a genius. And I'd be like, yeah, just genius enough to get a few questions wrong so that I would have things explained to me. That is maybe genius, because I wasn't stupid enough to simply copy the answers. But that's what kind of student I was. I was a really lackluster student. But I did have some interests. Those interests would later grow. Then I became a Christian through the Jesus movement when I was 15 years old. And at that point, bam, everything changed. I got D's and even an F prior to that in high school. After that, by the time I graduated, I had 5 A's on my card. I had almost straight A's. The other 2 were B's. Why? Because my study habits really didn't change a whole lot. What changed was I was suddenly engaged. And I was engaged because I knew life had meaning. And as I saw life had meaning, I began to apply it to everything, which is what I still do. At this moment in my life, my 14-year-old self would totally understand why life was so boring. My 16-year-old self would never understand why life was considered boring. And to this day, I'm never bored. Why? Everything's interesting. That's why I've got so many books. That's why I spend so much time thinking about things and talking to people and trying to understand and traveling. I don't travel just to have a vacation. I travel to learn. Everything is about learning. And that's what happened. Also, we had a couple of people from the Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary in Mill Valley, California, who taught us things like theology and my favorite, church history. I learned church history in high school. How cool was that? Also, I had friends who were reading weird books with me. So I had a handful of friends. We were reading things like John Wesley's journals, David Brainerd among the Native Americans. I even picked up a book by Karl Barth. I was just reading Charles Finney's revival lectures and C.S. Lewis and eventually George MacDonald's G.K. Chesterton and others. But the point is this. Now I look back now and I go like, well, John Wesley's very different than Charles Finney, who's very different than Karl Barth. And I also had a lot of respect for the Catholic saints, St. Francis, St. Augustine, these kind of people. And I was reading the Apostolic Fathers, the book that had like the martyrdom of Polycarp in it and things like that. So I had this very strange, and most importantly, I read the Bible a couple times through during that period, and one time in King James English. That does tell you something, since most people, now what they try to do is they dumb everything down. Well, it just doesn't communicate. I'm going like, no, what isn't communicating is you're not giving them any sense that the world has meaning. Something wants to happen on the phone over there, but it's not going to, because I'm going to keep talking. Because that's more important right now. I'm into it. I'm on a roll. So anyway, so this environment was good. It didn't stay good. And although I kept reading and exploring things, there was an attempt at higher education in here. I graduated from high school 6 months early, went and lived on a farm commune. Now, by this time, I'd been associated enough with the Jesus people to have been inside of cult compounds, to have met people who were survivors of the hippie era and had just like totally thrown their lives out of whack as a result of coming to San Francisco. I met people from San Quentin prison. I stayed in the same room as a guy. Later, I realized, that guy had to be totally bizarrely gay. A guy who was like off the streets of San Francisco from the Tenderloin. The more I think about it, and he used to say to me, and he had this really weird lisp, he'd say, "Bern, you're just so innocent." And I'm going like, I wonder what he's talking about. Then one day, though, he broke down a map of like lower San Francisco, and he says, "Yeah, this is the S&M area here, and this is the place. This is the strip where all the strip clubs are." You know, but I didn't take that as like some bizarre come on or anything. I was like, yeah, I need to understand what's going on in the world. And he had become a Christian, so he wasn't out to get me. But I stayed in the room with him for like a year. It never occurred to me anything. You know, it just was like, you know. And then, trying to go to Santa Rosa Junior College in Santa Rosa, California. I decided I was already interested in history. I was picking up Jesus People, these little weird newspapers that we'd pass out, and I was saving them. I still have them. They're very rare. I recognized I was taking photos of my friends in the Jesus movement because I recognized this is going to pass. And I didn't call it documentation then, but I just said, I want to keep some of these faces because they changed, people coming and going. And university education, college education didn't stick because I went there and one guy was all right. He was talking about the Wild West. I was really interested in Western U.S. history. And then I went to another one. It was there, and I remember, you know, class. There was probably about 50 people in it, and the teacher said, "We're going to discuss U.S. history." And before we start, how many people here think that people are basically good? And everybody in their hand went up for like, except me and one other person. And then he said, well, I hope to prove to all of you why humanity is filled with good things and that we will progress and find a way. And it was just like, good luck trying that with the second half of U.S. history here. You got Reconstruction era, you've got the genocide of the Indians, you've got big business scandals, you've got greed unchecked, you've got the First World War, you've got the Depression, the Second World War, repression in the 50s, and the Vietnam War, which was still going on. Yeah, good luck. But people are basically good. No, they're not. People are basically complicated. And sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're selfish to the bone. Face up to it. And so I stopped taking that course because I said, this guy is an idiot. After about 3-4 weeks, I just said, nah, I can't do this anymore. Guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And not that I knew, I just knew he was wrong. I had run into enough of actual life to know how complex things could be. A little later, I was picked to go be a missionary in Mexico City. Long story. But, so I had to go back to school again to learn Spanish. So I was learning Spanish, and then I was also taking a music theory course, and I also thought well, the music theory course is interesting, Spanish is okay, but I shouldn't be here. I'm planning to go to Mexico, and I'm reading Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, all 3 volumes. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong was I wasn't interested in it. I mean, Mexicans are great. Mexican history is exciting. But I didn't have any particular things. So I just said, okay, I'm not going to go. And I stopped going to the university. But then, during this period, our group had been mutating from this Jesus People group, which was kind of anarchic, and we were told to go to whatever church you want, into more of an independent church with cult-like aspects is the best way. Was it a full-on cult? Not really, but then again, we have an awful lot of characteristics. I've talked about this elsewhere, and I'm not going to go into it. But the thing is, to get out, I started reading. And Solzhenitsyn was in there, but also the work of C.S. Lewis that everybody wasn't reading. So everybody was reading Mere Christianity and The Problem of Pain and Chronicles of Narnia and the science fiction trilogy, and I was reading The Discarded Image, Experiment in Criticism, his preface to Paradise Lost, all this other stuff. I was moving on into G.K. Chesterton. I was moving on. I was getting interested. I'd stopped going to school before, and I'd been asked to go to read Moby Dick. I said, now I'm going to start learning. And so I literally be walking down the street reading Moby Dick as I was walking in downtown Petaluma, or The Hunchback of Notre Dame de Paris. And I got really interested. I just kept reading and reading. It's like, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Okay, we're going to read another Victor Hugo book. Toilers of the Sea is absolutely amazing. And I just kept reading. I said, I'm going to educate myself. And I've been doing that ever since. And the weird thing about educating yourself is you never feel like you've arrived. You don't have a diploma. So I always feel there's more to do. But you know what? That keeps me alive, because a lot of people get a camel's hump philosophy of education, where you go to school, you tank up, and then you go through the rest of life. You don't need education anymore. To which I'm much more grateful that I didn't end up with that idea. But eventually the tensions got too much with me and the group, and so I ended up going to L'Abri in Switzerland. And now, this was, bam, everything suddenly clicked for me. I would say, up until that point, Bern wasn't fully formed yet. Not that Bern is ever fully formed. He's still growing. My feeling, people say, life is for the young people. I'm going like, bullshit. Not as long as I'm still alive. I'm not done. I'll be done when I stop breathing. Don't count me out yet. That's my philosophy. But I have the whole video on the importance of L'Abri, so I'll just quickly mention these things. They took questions, all questions seriously, serious questions, not trick questions. Is God so big that God can make a rock that God can't lift? Not those dumb kind of questions, not silly questions that are just there to trick you. But real questions, they took them seriously. They had lectures on subjects that related to history, art, culture, philosophical, theological, sociological issues that connected to life, the life on the streets in the late 20th century. That was the important part. And they also emphasized that Jesus was the Lord of all life. And that included your mind. That included art. Whereas many Christians, it's like they were suspicious of intellectual things and really suspicious of the arts. And all of this knowledge got integrated into me, and I learned how to ask questions and research things for myself. I've discussed it in other places, but essentially that was a milestone for me. That was a watershed moment for me. And everything else came after that. And in fact, my education gets much different after that. I ended up in New York City. And it was an information overload. New York City was like having the internet on the streets. It's like, I didn't even need the internet when I was in New York City, even though it started, because, heck, I could just walk down the street and find any book I wanted. I could go to find movies everywhere. And there were lots of people I knew. I couldn't walk through the East Village without bumping into people I knew. I would see friends' concerts all the time. I would see friends' dance shows. I would go to art gallery exhibits by friends and other people. So I was really connected with life. Now, there was actually a lot less intellectual discussion in New York City than you might guess. And I think that's partly because it was more rough and tumble on the spot. You might, like I was working as an art mover for 3 years, and you would have interesting discussions about art with your fellow drivers who all had to be artists. I guess I was considered an artist. I do some arty things. But it was less of that kind of thing you imagine happening in educational institutes. Now, I'm sure it was happening somewhere, but I was existing in the countercultural fringes at the time. But one thing that did happen, and this happened through working in I worked at a very large record store where I was a buyer for lots of music. I also worked at Forbidden Planet, where we sold all sorts of things related to comic books, fantasy books, science fiction, these kinds of genres. Also, I worked buying and selling record collections. Then I did weird things like house painting, which is a whole different story. But nevertheless, in all of these things, I learned things. I kept meeting experts in all sorts of different fields, in music, in art, in culture. I met people who were obsessives about these things. I had one friend who had over 500 Western swing albums, and just like, that takes a lot of dedication. I think I could collect for a while and come up with 100, maybe. I only have about 30 or 40 Western swing albums. But that tells you something. This guy knows everything. I met another guy who was really into the blues. And he was really a snob about it, too. He was like, that blues isn't so good. But this blues, did you get any more of those? But you talk with these people. Like I mentioned before, I met people like Brian Eno. I met people who were knowledgeable about their fields from the inside out. Also, I just had access to people. One thing I did learn from working in the art world was that art schools are essentially, and all the artists who had all gone through art school said the same thing, they're basically a waste of time. And in fact, there's a movie called Art School Confidential, done by Terry Zwigoff. That is a great book. And it shows you that the art schools had the whole politically correct woke program down way before anybody else. And this book, this came out in the aughts, Art School Confidential. Look it up. It's a funny movie. But it also shows you what art school's like. And I think a lot of people from art school hate this. Because it's just like bang on this, just hits it, nails it. And I learned that there was something of a con and a cult about art. And I'd be in an elevator with like gallery owners, and they would be talking about, as we're entering the post-appropriational phase, I'm sitting there going like, you guys really think you're saying something, don't you? And I think I mentioned the story where I was at an art gallery exhibition, and I was just saying to a woman friend of mine, this stuff is all like the emperor's new clothes. I mean, Yoko Ono was sitting there in this long, multi-layer chessboard that's all white, with her son Sean pretending to be John, and then another guy had marbles on the floor, and I just remembered, and the woman says, what do you think of this show? It was like a group show, and I said, this is the emperor's new clothes. And she said to me, you realize I own an art gallery? And I go like, yeah, I know. Just like, so what? But that's what I learned. I learned to see through these things. At the same time, I got into tons and tons of art galleries and art museums, and more importantly, met artists. Sometime I should do a whole thing about all of that happened during that period. It was really fascinating. But I had a direct access to intellectual and cultural developments. I could see things moving, or rather they were seething, they were writhing, they were developing. And I remember going to shows and places that made me nervous, because it's like, what are they going to do here? And I think I told you all about the guy who, I was at a noise show, and it was just like ear-shattering noise for 45 minutes from this one band. They looked like a rock band, and their music was all just pure feedback and stuff. And I walked up to the guy afterwards, and by this time I knew a few things, and I just said to him, the point of that was to cause pain, right? And he says, you got it, you got it, you got it. It's just like, okay, I got that. But also in New York, as you can tell by some of these stories, I learned to deal with serious darkness. From seeing people shot in front of my house, to having friends threatened by drug dealers very seriously threatened, so much so that they ended up naming a street drug after him when he witnessed something. Just being mugged, gang of twice, having money taken from me and stuff like this, having people threaten you with guns. New York City. I learned a lot. And what I learned is all that other stuff, that intellectual stuff, doesn't mean a thing if it doesn't answer the question of evil. And I'm talking about serious practical evil here. But the thing is, New York City was way too distracting, which is why I left. I eventually went to Alaska. And I also brought with me my library up there, which was not quite as big as it is now. But that's where I developed it, because I used to get so much music for free. I used to go skulking around the East Village and West Village for books. I didn't collect any videos there. That all started after I got to Alaska and realized, these people need a video store like the kind I would bring, which would be more like something from New York City. But I learned that there was a difference. I was a bit of a collector, but not just a collector. The collector guy is the guy who gets 500 copies of Western swing albums. That's a collector. Then there's the scholar. I wasn't quite a scholar, but I was more of a scholar than a collector. What I wanted to know was the answer to questions so that I could tell other people, like you, if I'm at all helpful. And I was an observer. So I would go places sometimes not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand things. And I remember the day I was watching Allen Ginsberg do his poetry. This was a couple of years before his death. And I'm sitting there going like, so this is one of the guys that all of this is here because they started this stuff in the 1950s, the beats. And I said, it's like built on a pebble. It's just, this guy isn't much at all. I mean, people would say, oh, Allen Ginsberg. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I saw him do his stuff. He's kind of a bit self-righteous, and other problems, which I'm not going into at the moment. And then one could be an apprentice. Have I ever been an apprentice? Well, in short spurts, I learned to be an apprentice for radio. I certainly learned to be an apprentice for ditch digging back in my Christian house days. But I learned these are all the different ways a person can learn that I learned. So apprentice is more the hands-on. Someone teaches you how to cook. Someone teaches you how to build something. And I was very good at observing and then going and doing. So, for instance, I've never made a shelving system quite like this one before, but I just did it. And in fact, I couldn't get a certain part of it done here, so I came up with another solution. That's what's interesting. That's also what keeps you alive. When you stop learning, you start dying. Say that one more time. When you stop learning, you start dying. If you end up just on the couch surfing, you're dead. You know, it may take a few years for your body to catch up with you, but you already started the process. And just a few words on how I read. Evidently, I do a lot of reading. I always think I'm really slow. And I see there are channels on the internet that I find interesting of people who collect books. And they always seem to be reading so much. And I sit there, I read 4 books this month. And I'm sitting there going like, I didn't, you know. But what I do is I just keep going. I don't stop. I always have to be reading. But I'm also watching. I'm on the computer. I'm listening. Now, in the past, I listened a lot more, so I've got a lot of that. It's already just in there. So if I say, ooh, I'd like to hear this, bam, I've got 9,000 songs on my computer, and I need to access a certain song. I just made a playlist for myself of just stuff with a weird sort of ABBA-esque quality. And it's not all just ABBA. It's groups like the second chapter of Acts from the Christian sphere, a group that came before ABBA called Middle of the Road, and there's these other groups, and it's just this weird sort of thing. And I thought, those are all kind of together from the 70s, aren't they? And a word about how I pursue interests. I'll probably deal more with books and how to pursue interests in the future, but just a word about it. I pursue my interests in increments. For instance, a good way to do it is how I learned about puppetry. And I learned about puppetry because I suspected there was something there. I saw these movies by Jan Schwankmeyer from the Czech Republic and the Quay brothers, who are Americans but who live in England but very influenced by Polish animation. And so I let that settle in me for a while. And then eventually I started saying to myself, what if it's not the films? What if it's not the animation? What if it's the puppets that are so interesting? And so then I started to slowly, I bought 1 book on puppets while all the while I lived in New York. That's an okay book. I didn't get the best book, but it was okay. And it was hard to find books on puppets. It's not like you walk into a store and go, do you have any books on puppetry? And they look at you like, huh? And it's the same wherever you go. Unless it's really a store that deals with theater stuff. But then I decided I need to go out and find real puppet shows. I went to 1 before I left New York. 2, I saw Vietnamese water puppets in New York. That was really fascinating. But I went to another school presentation, and waiting for the puppet show to start was more interesting than actually watching the puppet show. I don't remember the puppet show, but I remember the mood of anticipation before it, thinking that anything could happen. If there's a spoon sitting there, it could start moving. I don't know what's going to happen. And later I found that is part of puppetry, waiting for something to happen. But then I made a major expedition to... I kind of had a moment where I said, do I want to go to Europe and spend a few months and look for World War II sites, or do I want to go to Europe and look for puppetry and maybe talk to some puppeteers? And I thought about it, I said, the puppeteers. And a couple of World War II sites. And so that started the really serious, that was like 2005, started my really serious knowledge. By that time, I'd already got a few books, maybe 3 or 4. Now I've got maybe 150 books related to puppetry, masks, things like the Commedia dell'arte, all the stuff that's connected to it. And that's what I do, is I start branching out. Now, in 2012, I had to actually interview the late great, he died in, I think, 2015 or 2014, Henryk Yurkowski, who was the great European puppet historian. And James, you know who you are. You got one of his volumes of puppetry history. I had the possibility of buying them both for $200 then. Now they're about $800 a piece. One of my regrets in life, such is life, his 2-volume European history. But anyway, I did get another book by him. But by 2012, I knew enough about puppetry to interview him. And so basically, I just started living and breathing that stuff. The same happened with ballet, and the same happened, that was about 2011. And in 2012, it started again with Georgia, the country where I live now. And I was sitting the other day with a friend of mine who's a principal dancer in a ballet troupe here. And I told her, I got interested in Georgia and ballet. And I said, and here I am now. And she looked at me and just laughed because she understood what I was saying. That you don't get anywhere unless you have somewhere to get to. And so, but I use, with music, but music led to art, led to all these other things. And then there was film as well, was very interesting. And I continue on with those. So while I've been here, I've picked up things related to comic books and illustration because I'm following this new course in my mind connecting, how about this? World War II nose art on planes to psychedelic posters in San Francisco. It's an interesting story. Sometime I might get into it. But that's what I do, is I explore. I look for connections, and that's how I learn. And that's how I continue learning. Everything just continues that way. So one thing is clear. We need a new approach to education. And how shall we get it? Well, one thing's clear is I can't scale up my own experiences because they're too individual. Something else needs to happen. I often wonder what would have happened had I had, a family that was together, had I had enough discipline as a result of that to really be educated well, had I been able to get into one of the quality schools rather than, junior high schools or, whatever, junior high, might as well have been junior colleges. What would have happened if I had actually, been exposed to a really good education? I don't know. And truthfully, one of the reasons I decided to stop going to school is because I knew I was going to start trying to understand music. And I knew that the educational system would beat out of me what I wanted to explore. That is to say, I could sense. At that time, there was no one really dealing with popular music on the level I was already working on. And so I said, I'm just going to go this way. Now, when I hear, someone told me, it was about 20, 25 years ago, someone told me, yeah, we had a class on new wave music. And they started talking about bands like the Police. I just said, stop. You mentioned the Police and new wave music in the same breath. Did he also mention that everyone alive at the time considered the Police to be a commercial sellout? Did he mention that? No? Whatever that person said is disqualified instantly. And that's the problem, is that people, it's the education that people are getting. I mean, I would hate to try to understand music today and look through all of the hippie stuff and the punk stuff and the grunge era and 1950s music and jazz and classical music all through the lens of power and oppression politics. I would not be in school. I would have been like, sorry, I'm out of here. It would be the same with the guy saying that everybody is basically good. Yeah, no, they're not. Everyone's basically like Solzhenitsyn says, the line between good and evil is running down all of us. And it depends, as the old Native American saying goes, which dog you feed. Depends on which one you grow. But one person who has thought about these things is Jonathan Haidt. And he has what he calls his heterodox academy. I don't know if he's still doing it, but basically what he wanted to do is hook up people. He realized that in his own field of sociology and psychology, it was all left-wing people. There were no more people who were conservative, no more people on the right, as if these people had no ideas. And so he wanted to integrate more, because you need people from the other perspective to balance out and challenge your ideas. And if it's just one side, and that's what's happened in education, one side ruled, one side won, and they're calling all the rules. And anybody who doesn't agree, anybody who challenges their main doctrines, is considered almost subhuman, as evidenced by all the death threats that people get who disagree with these people, whether it's from Antifa or the trans activists or whatnot. They are making death threats with anyone who pulls up different information. So let's listen to Jordan Peterson interviewing Jonathan Haidt talking about these things.
That's what's happening in America with universities. We are losing the support of half the country. This is unsustainable, especially in red states where they control the purse strings. So I think we have a major crisis. I think we've got to go into crisis mode, and we've got to clean up our act. So just as we're doing in psychology with the Replication Project, we recognize that our methods weren't good enough, and we're doing a crash course, thanks to Brian Nosek and others, the Open Science Project. We're really trying to improve our game. Thank God, we need to. I think we have to do the exact same thing about partisanship and our duties.
Okay, so let's talk about Heterodox Academy, because you set that up, this organization that you should tell everybody about, in precisely to deal with this issue. And so I'd like to know about it, how it's growing, what it's doing, what your aims are, all of that.
Yeah. So I gave this talk in 2011, laying out the fact that we have no more conservatives in social psychology, and why this makes it hard for us to find truth. And in the months after that, a few social psychologists resonated with the message. They said, wow, I think you're right. I have some data on this. So the five of us, or six of us, wrote this paper. It came out in Behavioral and Brain Sciences. Charlotta Stern, was the sixth one that I forgot to add in before. We got this paper published in Behavioral and Brain Sciences. It came out, it was sort of online in 2014, but it came out for good in the summer of 2015. Which coincidentally was the same summer that my article came out with Greg Lukianoff called The Coddling of the American Mind. That was about things going on with undergrads. But our concern was entirely faculty. It was just the nature of the academic community, the research community. So we got these two things going on, summer of 2015. And then that summer I hear from Nick Rosenkrantz, a law professor, who says we have the same problem in law.
And might even be worse in law. Well, it's really bad in Canada in law.
Okay, and as he points out, we're training all these students, they never meet a conservative, then they have to go argue cases in front of judges, half of whom were appointed by Republicans. They have no idea what a conservative thinks. This is malpractice. We got to train it. So, and I hear from a sociologist, Chris Martin, same thing in sociology. So the three of us said, hey, this is a big problem for the whole academy.
Have you looked at faculties of education?
Oh my God, those are the worst. By worst, I don't know the numbers, but in terms of the vindictiveness, the pressure put on any non-conforming opinion, my impression, I don't have data, but my impression from the letters I get is that education schools and social work schools are the worst.
That's exactly in keeping with my understanding as well. It's hard to tell which of those two are worst. I would say it's the faculties of education because they have a direct pipeline to kids.
Oh, in terms of their effects, yes, far more pernicious. Yeah, that's right.
But equally warped, let's say, but more pernicious. Right. And the things that are happening in the Canadian education system as a consequence of that are so reprehensible. Yeah.
And we should get to that because it's happening here too with these ideas filtering down to high school. I've been so focused on college. Now we're discovering the problem is actually baked in. The illiberal attitudes are often baked in by the time they arrive.
Yes, and purposefully, like in Canada, increasingly, the radical leftists have control over curriculum development, and they're starting to develop social justice curriculums, which is what they call them for kindergarten kids. Yeah.
And one of the things I read a while ago, and I'm going to pull this up for you here, it's from Jacques Ellul's interview book called In Season, Out of Season. And he talks about basically French education going to the dogs. And he says something new will have to be created. He calls it something like a forum-style university. And what he says there is, I think, really, really important. Let me bring these up here. He is asked, do you believe that a new revolution in the university is possible? This was about early 80s, about 1984 or so. He says, I prefer to call a spade a spade. There is no more university. The concept of a global education that develops the mind, the thinking, the personality, and instigates true research no longer exists. We manufacture little technicians. That's all. Each one useful in his slot. But I will also say that, having a clean slate, we must make something else. Recreate a true university. a truly interdisciplinary universitas, where independent people can teach independently. I believe that this orientation, in my opinion, is essential, is historical. In other words, I give the French university less than 10 years to go to the dogs. Then something else will have to be created. I am sorry, I am too old to take part in it. And he died, I believe, in like 1987 or so. When asked further about this university, new university, he says, should it have a diploma? Your new idea for a university. He says, the diploma only has a utilitarian purpose. That they be given in technical schools and institutes that train electrical engineers, chemists, judges, or doctors, I agree with completely. But I observe in all domains the need for something else. For example, now when history is disappearing from the teaching curriculum, people are fascinated by history. Students ask for it, unlike the situation 25 years ago. Workers, too, have asked my permission to attend one or another of my classes, social history, for instance. There's no need to have a diploma to attend classes, and I assure you that they, the workers, were more motivated to study my sections on labor unions than many of my students. And he goes on, and the interviewer says, now to continue with this utopia, she's already said, this sounds like a utopia. He says, do you think that such a university could accommodate full-time teachers? He says, I believe that either the professors will accept a more modest lifestyle in view of the importance of this work of intellectually and culturally transforming the world, or else we could find professors to divide their time between paid teaching and the universitas, which is his name for what he's talking about. You mentioned a utopia. Assuredly, it is utopian to put together from scratch a model such as this one. But I am telling you that this will happen in the next 10 years. The state will never allow such a valuable machinery as the university to escape from its clutches. The present political power in France will never tolerate the development of disciplines that have no use and produce nothing. History, sociology, and philosophy, but serve only to furnish critical references. It is not insignificant that the present Minister of Education has for the past 5 years systematically destroyed the university body. If it is rebuilt on the fringes and it obtains the results I hope for, it will be the site of a political battle. It will be the same no matter who is in power, liberal socialists, or the communists, or the liberal Gaullists, or the fascists. And I have muddled over his remarks there for a long time about the need for some sort of educational system. And I don't have the answers. But I think people together can push and see what we can do. And I am heartened that there are people, for instance, who are engaging with some of my ideas, but also engaging with ideas of many other people who have been speaking on the internet. But the point is, we need that in reality. I think the internet is a good place to begin, but we need it in reality, because reality is where it's all falling apart. You know, just letting the architects alone do whatever they want to do without any sense of responsibility to anyone besides the corporations is a huge mistake, and is creating a world of dark authoritarian possibilities. All those huge buildings have this crushing sense about them. They're not made on a human scale. And I think that we have to provide something different. And like I say, when it comes to this stuff, you know, I'm 67. No, I will be 67. I'm almost done with being 67. That's what the birthday means. It's not the beginning of 67. It's the end of 67. But so I'm 66, almost 67. And I feel like I'm going to be around as long as, like I said, I'm not done till I'm done. So as long as I can do something, I'm doing something. But I want to encourage people who are younger than me to find new ways to educate. What made L'Abri work and still work? Questions. Taking questions seriously. I think this is one thing we have to integrate back into education. Another thing is I really like the combination of study and work. Because it teaches you two things at once. One, how to pull weeds out of the ground, how to clean up in the kitchen, how to remove the snow. And two, wow, look at the ideas you get to think about while you're doing that you learned earlier in the day. Also, getting away is important. And by getting away, I mean having places to go. That was one thing about Switzerland that I really liked. Just a bus ride from the valley up to Uemo is about, 1,000 meters or so, 3,000 feet. But it's on these perilous cliffs. Put your mind somewhere else. You're already there. Which is why I think the L'Abri in Switzerland was that's one of the things that made it so successful, was that journey. I had always hoped that I could do something like that in Alaska, but it was probably a bit too far away. And getting away doesn't necessarily mean leaving the town. For instance, I'm in Tbilisi now. There's over 1 million people here, so it's not a tiny town. But I am away from all of you. I am somewhere different. I can disappear into the mountains. If anyone comes here, we can take trips into the mountains, which is, you need that interaction with the practical, the real, to make the education more important. That's what I was saying about evil. Coming across real evil on the streets in New York City radically changed how I looked at knowledge. Because without an answer to that, all the rest of it, it's like when I hear people talking about philosophy and I'm going like, yeah, you have really, literally never seen someone dead. You really don't know what you're talking about, because what you're saying is fine, theoretically, but life isn't lived theoretically. Life is lived practically. And day to day, these things come at you and they smack you in the face. And if you're not ready for them, if your ideas are only on the book, only, on a website, something like that, then they don't work. I think this is the problem with a lot of philosophical dialogue, is that it needs the real. And not to talk about what is the real. You can't talk about what it is until you experience it. So you can't come up with something on your own. So getting away. But here, I'm creating a house. People have come in. I've just built this bookshelf, you may notice. I'm proud of it. And, but people are coming in here and now I'm going, wow. If you ever were in my house in Alaska, you know what it was like to walk into my house. If you were ever in my house in New York City, you know what it was like to walk into my house. I look at the house as the first place of conversation. And so if all you got on your walls is repeatable objects, posters that anyone could buy, things that don't spark conversation, I want things that spark conversation, because that's what life is about. When you get down to it, we need food, water, all that stuff, shelter, clothing. And we need conversation. We need stories. We need real face-to-face reality and people. And learn to love those people so that we can also experience the love of God. And another thing about L'Abri, when you go there, you put your tech aside. So crucial. The more tech you have around you, and it's not just the smartphone, but it's the screens. If that's something that everybody's doing on their own all the time, it's one thing to live that way. It's another thing to be in groups. Parties where people are just sitting there looking. It's just like, why are you here if you're just looking at your device? We need to put these things away at times. Get a breath of fresh air. Learn how to talk. And they had tutors there who were also very good at saying, when I first got there, I said I wanted to learn about the arts and culture and such. I was interested in music. And over time I realized, I've come out of kind of a cult, haven't I? And the tutors just kind of went with me on that. And that's how it should be. So those are just some thoughts about education. There's obviously a ton more I can say. I'm sure I didn't answer whatever question you had, but I did a video recently on community. Well, this is another thing that without a new approach to education, we are doomed. Homeschooling alone won't bail us out because of the difference. And same with just these Christian classical education schools, let alone just your standard Christian. I went to 2 different Christian high schools to perform my puppet show, my very bizarre puppet show called The Great Ziggurat in 2009. One was a classical Christian academy, and the other one was an Assembly of God school. The Classical Christian Academy, those people were engaged with what I was doing. The students realized, wow, what is this? We've never seen puppets like this. We've never, and in fact, when it was over, they just sat there. They couldn't leave because it was so new. And what I was also doing was not dumbing anything down for them. Dumbing things down is the worst thing that Americans do, really. Because what happens is you dumb things down, and then it gets further down. And then you have to keep dumbing them down. And that's what television is like now. That is what movies are often like now. It's just the dumbest of the dumb. People like spectacle, and that's about it. I'm not saying everybody likes that. I think there are actually people who are experiencing their spiritual vitamin deficiency, who are noticing the signs of oncoming spiritual diabetes or rickets, and they need to do something about it. And thinking is one of the things to do. Talking is also one of the things you need to do. And if there's no one in your area you can talk to, then you might think about being somewhere else. So, well, thanks for watching me. Like I say, I don't have any big rule about education except to say we really need to preserve all of the knowledge that came before us. And there's so much knowledge that has been shelved because it's no longer cool. And we need to stop thinking about that and start researching. And everybody needs to do their own thing. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. I mean that people need to... It's like at the end of the movie Fahrenheit 451, where everyone becomes a book. And I think that's a little utopian and odd, but I think everyone should become a subject and learn something that you can share with us, no matter what it is. It can be anything from raising rabbits to making shoes. We certainly don't have enough people making shoes anymore. And if there was a major war with a certain large country in Asia, America would be soon without shoes. Think about it. We need to learn everything from the practical to the abstract. Thanks for listening. This is Bern from Tbilisi, Georgia, saying, throw a beat, we will meet again. And remember, Anadromous describes going against the stream. You need to do that.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.
Now, Mr. Hart, can you relate our next case to the summary we've been building?
Thank you. I prefer to pass.
What did you say?
Well, I have nothing relevant to say concerning the case. However, when I have something relevant to say, I shall raise my hand.
Mr. Hart, would you step down here? Hart, here's a dime. Call your mother. Tell her there's serious doubt about your becoming a lawyer.